we're in the middle, we're actually concluding a series today entitled Open Invitation. And the whole premise of this series has really come around this very idea right here, that an invitation can be a powerful thing. An invitation can be a very powerful thing. I mean, not all invitations are good, but some are good. Some invitations are bad. Some invitations have the ability to be really, really kind of small, and some invitations are really big. In fact, last week we talked about jury summons and the invitation to be a juror and participate in the judicial system of our world. And they call it a summons. It's really an invitation. And little did I know, we had two different people from our church that had jury duty on Monday. Like I wasn't trying to speak that into existence, and I hope nobody has jury duty tomorrow. If you do, just tell them you're a pastor. It gets you off every time. They're like, we don't want that guy on the jury. It works. But don't lie. I mean, don't do that anyway. But here's the thing that we've been talking about through the course of this is there's good invitations, there's bad invitations, but isn't it true that it's not until later that we realize whether it was a good or a bad invitation? That sometimes big invitations, sometimes small invitations, when the story plays out, we realize that the invitation was remarkable. I mean, it was just one invitation to coffee, and that one little invitation turned into a second, which turned into a third, which now we're married and we're expecting another kid, right? That's not a declaration, all right? That's not, anyway. But isn't it true that ultimately we can find that in many instances we see that a simple invitation can be life-changing? An imperfect invitation, a small invitation. I mean, a small, simple, imperfect invitation can absolutely be life-changing. And when we look at that, when we look at life, when we see what's going on, we realize that when we are invited to something, we don't know the whole story just yet when we get that simple invitation. So in week one, we gave you this little challenge, and we gave you this challenge because when it comes to faith, we really believe that inviting people into your faith story and inviting people along your journey and sharing about how Jesus has impacted you and changed your life is a powerful thing. And one of the best ways you can do that is through inviting them to join you at the local, invite you here, invite you to join us here at North Tarrant. So we gave you a challenge before Easter, which is on April 20th, to invite someone before Easter. Maybe it's for Easter service, maybe it's before then, but to invite someone. Now, an invitation can be simple, and we acknowledge that, right? And we laughed about the fact that you could just easily put something on social media and say, I checked that box, did my homework, let's go. So we thought, what if we turn it up just a notch, right? Let's give it a little bit of spice, a little bit of flavor. And so rather than just inviting, what if we gave everybody the challenge to bring someone with you before Easter? Not just simply invite, but to bring somebody to join you. Now, what we talked about last week is in order to invite, we want to know what are good and effective ways to have an invitation, which ultimately begs the question, what makes an invitation good? Or said a little differently, what is it that makes an invitation good? What is a good invitation, or what is it that makes an invitation good? We don't want it to be effective or ineffective. We want to be effective, but we don't want to be weird, right? We know how those church people are. They can be weird at times. We want something that could possibly pay off, but doesn't end a relationship or end a friendship. And so that's what we talked about last week, that we began talking about this idea that when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to an invitation, we said last week that a good invitation is often preceded by something. A good invitation is often preceded by doing good. That if we are not doing good, if we are not living up to what we are inviting somebody to take on or to participate in, oftentimes our invitations will come out flat, hypocritical, dare I say. And we looked at how in many people's eyes, there's nothing really good coming out of the church, which makes it really difficult to invite somebody to. Because so many in our world today, they see church and religion and religiosity and pastors, they have negative connotations of it. So in order for us to invite people to experience what it looks like to follow Jesus, not merely just to come and show up and check a box at church, but to really experience what does it mean, what does it look like to follow Jesus, it begs the question that we invite, that if we're silent, then who will be able to invite those around us, those that we impact, those that we engage with? And Paul understood this challenge. Paul, who was one of the greatest church leaders in all time. Even some social scientists say that he was more responsible for the spread of the church than Jesus himself. Now, if you've read the story of Jesus throughout the course of whether it's Luke or John or Mark or Matthew, you realize the significance that Jesus plays, obviously. But from an unbelieving world, they see Paul, or the guy named Saul before that, they see the influence he had on the church and the way that he started churches and the way that he lived out his faith was so monumental to what the church is today. And Paul understood this challenge. In fact, Paul says to the church in Rome, he says, but how can they, those that are around you, how can they call on him? How can they believe in Jesus? How can they call on Jesus to save them unless they believe in him? I mean, Paul, that's a great question. Paul's like, I'm not done. And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? Well, Paul, that's a great question too. To which he says, I'm not done. And how can they hear about him unless somebody tells them? Which gets us to the purpose, the point, where we're coming from this series. It's this question, are we inviting? And that can be a challenging question. We talked about last week. I mean, just asking this question, for some of us, it's like, oh, wait a second. You mean hold up, my blood pressure's going up a little bit. And that's okay, that's natural, right? But then the other side of this question is this, is if we're not inviting, why are we not inviting? And so today, what I want us to look at is another thing that precedes an invitation. I mean, we talked about last week the value of doing good and how being good helps strengthen our invitations. Today, I want to look at something else that precedes an invitation, something that's valuable. This is something that enlivens and it builds up and makes a stronger case for our invitations, but it also has the ability to weaken the effectiveness if we're not careful. And to start off, we're going to start with this principle right here, this idea that we invite people to things we're enjoying. Now, just kind of a sidebar, right? I mean, when was the last time you went to a remarkable restaurant and you left and you were like, that steak was incredible, right? We just left this Mexican restaurant and the queso was on point. In fact, the queso was incredible. Not only was the queso good, but it was affordable, and they gave push pops to my boys when we left. Like, oh my goodness, like they thought of everything. You need to go, right? Like, I'm not gonna name the restaurant because that's just gonna make you like wanna go there after church, anyway. But we invite people naturally to things we enjoy. Maybe it's not food, maybe it's a movie, right? You saw this incredible movie and you're like, oh my goodness, you've got to go see it. Everywhere you go, you're talking about, I saw the newest Marvel movie and it was incredible. Maybe it wasn't, I don't know, I haven't seen it. I can't invite you to it. But, or maybe it's not a movie, maybe it's a book. You read a book and it changed your life. You read a book and it was captivating. You read a book and you just couldn't put the book down. You got sucked up in the story and next thing you know, you're at coffee with some friends. You're like, guys, I bought y'all copies of this book. Let me tell you, it is incredible. You will open it up and you will not put it down, I promise. When you're excited, when you've engaged with, when you've enjoyed something, isn't it natural that you just invite somebody to? But when you're not excited about it, isn't it true that your invitation is not very good, right? Like, hey, y'all should go check out that restaurant. Oh, really? How was the food? It was okay. I've had better. Well, how was the service? I mean, my cup was empty the whole time. I drink water pretty fast, and I realized that, but they never filled my water cup up. But you really should go to that restaurant. That doesn't work, right? You should really read this book. Really, how was it? I haven't read it yet, but everybody's talking about it, so you just go ahead, right? If we're not enjoying something, doesn't it make it a little more difficult to invite somebody to take part in it? So we invite people to things we're enjoying, not to things we're enduring. We invite people to things we're enjoying, the things that we're excited about, the things that have captured our attention. We want to make sure the world knows about it. We post on it on social media. Everywhere we go, we're talking about how good this is. Sometimes we'll get water bottle stickers and we'll put water bottle stickers all over our water bottles so that everywhere we go, we're like, hey, look, check it out. I love it. It's changed my life. But when it comes to our faith, isn't it true that if we're not careful, we have the ability for our faith to drift from enjoying to enduring? I mean, we became followers of Jesus, and there was excitement, there was vigor. We started going to this church, and it was remarkable. I mean, everything was great. And then over time, like life happens, things happen, and the enjoyment meter just in life, it's not that things didn't get, that things changed. It's just that other things started capturing our attention. And all of a sudden, we started going to this restaurant all the time, and all of a sudden we slept in once, and all of a sudden it made it real easy to sleep in a second time and a third time, and all of a sudden the enjoyment of following Jesus became a little overwhelming, and so we began to endure it, and it became a box we check. And next thing you know, we're like, I know I should pray, I know I should read the Bible, I know I should bring joy in the situation, I know I should be forgiving, I know I should be loving, but at the end of the day, we're not really enjoying our faith as much as we used to. We're enduring it, and it makes it a lot more difficult to invite somebody to join us to something we're enduring. And as I mentioned earlier, the Apostle Paul knew this. He knew this up and down. He knew the value of enjoying. And he knew how, if you were enjoying something, that it would invigorate the invitation. If you were enjoying something, people would be drawn to you. If you found joy in what you were doing with life, that people would be gravitating towards you and be curious about you and want to change their life like you. And so Paul, who was so passionate about encouraging people to come to Jesus, Paul, who was remarkable when it comes to leading people to follow Jesus, he was so remarkable that he didn't care what the governmental authorities said. He just went right at it. And in many instances, he got hurt, he got stoned. In fact, sometimes he got thrown into prison. And one such time he was in prison, he wrote this letter to the church at Philippi. He wrote a couple different letters from prison. But the letter to the church at Philippi was a letter that over and over and over he writes about joy. Paul, you are in prison. How are you finding joy? Paul, you are coaching a third grade game and the kids are unruly and the ref is blowing his whistle every 3 seconds. How are you finding joy in these moments? He says, listen, check this out. Rejoice. Okay, sounds good, Paul. He's leaning in and he says, the circumstances so oftentimes dictate your emotions. I want you to remember to rejoice. Choose joy. Choose happy. Choose the emotion that wells within you. I want you to be cheerful, to be joyful. I want you to choose joy. I'm sitting in a prison cell, and the only thing I can think about is you. I want you to rejoice. Okay, Paul, well, you're in prison. What do we rejoice in? I want you to rejoice in the Lord, always. Guys, I'm stuck in prison right now, and I want you to know, yeah, I could easily try to figure my way out of here. I could tell you, hey, be quiet, because if you ever get in prison, the food is horrible, like you don't want to come here. But rather than trying to tell you to slow down your joy, I want you to remember to be joyful in everything. Why? Because your King, King Jesus, has overcome the world, and you can find joy knowing He's with you everywhere you go. To the church at Philippi, this was remarkable. Why? Because they knew Jesus. I mean, for some of them, they probably had an uncle who was sitting there at the Sermon on the Mount, who was watching Jesus teach, and they're like, I've been at church services before, but he taught with such authority, it blew my mind. Somebody was, you got another uncle over there that was there when Jesus fed 5,000, and he recounts, he remembers, he tells them, hey, I want you to know, there was a Happy Meal that Jesus grabbed from that kid, and then he fed thousands. Their life was forever changed. They knew good and well who the Lord was, who Jesus was, who Paul had given his life to, because they had either interacted with him or they knew people who had interacted with him, and their lives were changed because they knew that Jesus was near, that they could trust him, that this very Jesus, we saw him crucified and he overcame the grave. He defied death. We can rejoice. Another way Paul looks at this is he says, be cheerful with joyous celebration at all times in every third grade basketball game. Be cheerful with joyous celebrations every time they burn your steak. Be cheerful with joyous celebrations in every season of life. Isn't it true that life has its fair share of ups and downs? Diagnosis, job loss, relationship breaks. Paul looks at us and says, be cheerful, be joyful with joyous celebration in every season of life. Now, I want to caution you real quick. This isn't like begging you just to put on this fake joy, right? Like to have this fake happiness. You've experienced them, right? Those people that it's like, it's too good to be true. There's no way. I mean, I think there's a word that the kids like a rainbow puking unicorn. You don't want to be around. Like that's just it's too fake, right? But Paul's saying, in every season, I want you to choose joy. I want you to rejoice. I want you to be joyful. You see, joy is an emotion that we choose. Happiness is a response. Joy is an emotion that we choose. Yes, life is going to get us down, but we have the choice to be cheerful. We have the choice to be joyful in every season. Just Paul would say, rejoice in the Lord always. And it's as if he was trying to make sure to make the point. Somebody's like, hey, Paul, could you say it louder for the people in the back? Sure, I'll say it again. Rejoice. Paul's saying your joy is not merely for you, but the joy you have is for those around you. The joy you carry in every season of life has the ability to impact you and the ability to impact those around you, which Paul is saying, I want you to rejoice. Rejoice in the fact that God is with you. Rejoice in what he's done for you. Rejoice at how he's walked with you. And I want you to know that even in bad times, even in hard times, you have the choice to choose joy because of all that God has done for you. See, when we look back at the things that God has done, when we look back at different experiences, we find that when we can see that God is with us, it curates a joy inside of us. A joy that doesn't just impact me, a joy that impacts those around me. Which is why I really believe if we could just ask Paul, could you sum this up as succinctly as possible for us today? He would say this. Guys, following Jesus, truly following Jesus, not just going to church, truly following Jesus, not simply checking a box. When we choose to follow Jesus, it will lead us to joy. That's why we say all the time, you hear us say that following Jesus will make your life better and it'll make you better at life. Because in every situation, every hurdle, every struggle, we can find joy. Even when the world seems to think that there's no joy to be found. I was leading a group of college students at one point in my life, and I was a college student as well. And you might have seen this. Like I sometimes I think I know what I'm trying to say, and the word that comes out it doesn't always compute. You've probably seen that from time to time in a message. Like I say this, and you're like, he didn't mean that. Like yeah. Anyway. And I was encouraging these college leaders as you're impacting teenagers today. I want you to remember that following Jesus really, really will help you, and it really will encourage others. They'll see the joy and they'll want to be a part of it, right? And so I'm trying, I'm encouraging them, and I'm like, hey, let's pray. And in the middle of the prayer, I was just, like wanting them to feel it, and I'm begging God to do something great with them, and I'm like, God, would you just give them an inhumane joy? To which there was snickering and laughter. And they're like, did you just say inhumane joy? And I was like, I did. Like a joy that is beyond you, a joy that's outside of you. They're like, I don't think you understand what inhumane means. I was like, maybe I don't. Just shut up. And I don't want you to go destroy people with your joy. That would be inhumane. But isn't it true that when we choose to follow Jesus, there's a joy that we find inside of us that is, dare I say, inhumane? You know what I mean, not what I said. Because when we choose joy, what we found, and you've heard me talk about this, in a world where people are looking at Christians and all they see are the sound bites and they see the hurt and the pain, when we choose to allow following Jesus to bring joy to our hearts, what happens is those outside will begin to trust you and say, I know all those Christians, but you're different. Students in a campus where people, they know what Jesus is all about, or they think they do, because their parents who've chosen to tell them that church people are doing this and church people are all about that. What happens if you change the narrative for them and you show them that following Jesus really does bring joy? Yeah, I know what you've heard. I know what's going on, but you know what? Here, let me just tell you my experience. Because when somebody who doesn't believe, when somebody who's far from, when somebody who's investigating, they don't need to trust every Christian, which is beautiful. But when they begin to trust you, and they see your joy in the midst of your circumstances, they see the joy that you bring even though life is not fair, they're going to see there's something different. If I were in your shoes, I wouldn't be acting that way, but how? Why? And all of a sudden, that trust will lead to a curiosity where they sit down and they're like, I saw the way you went through that circumstance, that season of life. And I'm in there too now. I left the doctor. I wasn't prepared. Things didn't go well. I don't know what's next. And last year at the water cooler, you were telling me what you were going through. And at first, I just kind of crossed my arms thinking, oh, here comes another rainbow puking unicorn. But you lived it out. And I've been watching you for the last year, and now my world is impacted, and I need help. And I'm coming to you because you seem to have answers that I don't have. You see, your joy in the circumstances when people are watching, your world is watching, their influencers are everywhere. Trust leads to curiosity. And that curiosity from somebody watching you is going to lead them to an openness to change, an openness to begin to think, what you have, that joy that Paul spoke about from prison, there's something to that. Which begs the question, are you enjoying faith? Or are you just enduring it? Are you enjoying your faith, your journey with Christ? Or have we kind of gotten into that rut of life where we just, for no other reason other than just the drift of life, the gravitational pull of our life tends to lead us when it comes to our faith away from enjoying and towards enduring. And maybe the reason that we have such a hard time inviting is because we are not enjoying. Maybe the reason we have a hard time inviting people into our faith, it's a lot easier to talk about, you name it. I mean, I could go on and on. It's a lot easier to talk about Chick-fil-A sauce and Aggie baseball and basketball and football and how we're bad at everything. And it's a lot easier to talk about, right? Like, we could talk about the weather. We could talk about exercise. We could talk about food. It's a lot easier to talk about so many other things. But when it comes to our faith, sometimes we have a hard time mustering up the courage to invite people into our story, when that simple invitation could be the very invitation that could change the trajectory of their life. So, how do we get to a point to enjoy? I think one of the first things for me, one of the first ways that I can watch my drift, because I know I'm a pastor, I get to wear a microphone, I get to tell you how to live. I try to apply it. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's hard for me, but I'm glad we're in it together. And you know what helps? Is having people around me to remind me when life is hard, God's still good. Having people around me to remind me in the heart of circumstances that everything's going to be okay. It might not be great. It might not be the way you wanted it to. But getting connected with other people that can encourage and inspire and challenge your faith and inspire you to grow can be a valuable thing. Not just get connected, but serve somewhere. Finding a place to serve, finding a place to give of yourself, to realize that your world is bigger than just you. When we realize that our life, when we realize we are a means to somebody else's end, we begin to realize there is so much joy knowing I was a part of their story. Serve somewhere. Maybe for some of you, it's starting a spiritual practice. Maybe it began when you used to read the Bible all the time. You used to be a champion at reading the Bible. You were like one of those, I'm going to read the Bible through cover to cover every year. And now it's like, I don't even know where to start. Maybe prayer. Maybe for you, it's just starting a spiritual practice. Or maybe be an encourager. Just this past week, I had a friend of mine who called me up, and I hadn't heard from him in like 8 months or so. And I was like, hey, and he's like, hey, you know what? You came to mind today, so I decided to call you. My New Year's resolution this year is when I think about somebody, I'm calling them. I was like, thank you for calling me. So maybe one of the things you could do is when somebody comes to mind, shoot them a text, give them a call. Or maybe one of the things you could do is stop. Stop, fill in the blank. You know what that is. You know what you would fill in the blank with. There's something that has led to that drift. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's a hang-up. Maybe it's something that you're telling yourself it's not that big of a deal, but you know deep down inside, there's something inside of you that's telling you really should stop. So what does that look like? Here are just a few ways that I think we collectively can shift that barometer and can begin to engage and enjoy our faith once again. So let me ask you, and students, we're going to leave on this question. Have you had an experience that you enjoyed so much that you could not keep it quiet? I want you to talk about that. I want you to talk about that from a superficial, that steak you ate the other day, but also from a spiritual, from a, you know what, this is what this looks like, and I've got to talk about it. So students, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and go to your small groups. But what does that look like for us? Because here's what I know and what I've seen is when my life is changed by something, I talk about it. When my life is changed by something, and oftentimes it can be as simple as the food we eat. But when my life has been changed by something God has done, like I love hearing stories of people who've just begun following Jesus. I love hearing stories of people who are so passionate, they just read that they hit that rock bottom and something happened. They begin reading that book and all of a sudden they realize their life has been brought new and they can't help but tell people, hey, you know what? I want to tell you how Jesus has changed my life. I want to tell you what's going on. I am so excited. I want you to come and be a part of my church. Man, this is incredible what's happening. I want you to be a part of it. You see, when we have an experience that changes our life, it's so difficult for us to keep it quiet. So, as we said earlier, following Jesus leads us to joy. Following Jesus leads us to a joy that can be difficult. It leads us to a joy that's attractive, a joy that's exceptional. I mean, when we choose to follow Jesus, as I said earlier, it's a choice. Every day we get to make, we will choose joy today. Because every day there's a circumstance in front of us that is ripe and ready to rob your joy. So it begs the question, are you enjoying your faith? Or have we kind of just begun moving, drifting into that enduring stage? Because when there's joy, the invitation is a lot more exciting. When there's joy, bringing people in and talking to people about how Jesus has changed your life is that much more riveting. So, here's our encouragement, and here's our challenge this week. Would you choose joy? Would you choose, even though life might be challenging, would you choose joy because people are watching? People are listening in, and you have the chance to be that voice that brings incredible change to those around you. So let's choose joy this week.